Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Jessica Ter Haar. I'm with the International Probiotics Association, and it is my absolute pleasure to be here to present for the Canadian Digestive Health Foundation. I will be talking today about the big debate: should healthy people be taking probiotics? My disclosures, as I mentioned, I am the scientific director for the International Probiotics Association. I'm also a consultant on the side with MICA Insights, and I'm the founder and co-chair of the conference and scientific working group Women and Their Microbes. My background and my credentials for being able to deliver this talk is threefold. One, a PhD in medical sciences and microbiology. I focused a lot on probiotics and women's health, so that's my core expertise. I also did a master's in nutrition and nutraceuticals from the University of Guelph, so hopefully there are some alumni in the audience or those maybe who have gone to Guelph. And lastly, I did a Bachelor of Kinesiology at York University. I will say that the opinions here presented are my own and do not represent the opinions of any of the above organizations mentioned. Today, what I want to talk to you about are four things. So I want to really set the stage for this debate. And I'll be talking about things that are important in terms of definitions, really making sure we're on the same page. And that includes what is and was not a probiotic, regulations of probiotic supplements in Canada, and how probiotics do not behave like drugs. Then we'll jump into the debate, and I will try to present both sides, and then we'll have a rebuttal, and then some final comments, and I'll leave you with some take-home messages. At the end of all of this, you will definitely be on the same page as to what a probiotic is and what is not, according to the most accepted and universally, globally recognized definition of a probiotic. You will understand why that matters. I will present, again, both sides' evidence and talking points for and against taking probiotics as a healthy person. And ultimately, you'll leave with the tools to be able to assess for yourself and your patients or your consumers whether they should take probiotics or not, because ultimately it's about empowering people with evidence-based information. So let's jump right in. And what the heck does a Canadian fur trader named Alexis Saint-Martin have to do with gut health? Well, Hippocrates said all diseases begin in the gut, and you can make the extension that health begins in the gut too, to a certain extent. So this gentleman was interesting because at a certain moment he got shot. The Canadian fur trade, for those of you who know, was very treacherous. And there was a US Army surgeon named Beaumont who ended up treating him. He gave him some surgery to, repair his wound, but there was a fistula that ended up being necessary. So that's, for those of you who don't know, it's sort of like a window, a hole in the gut. So Beaumont could actually see what was happening as the food would pass by in that part of the gastrointestinal tract. And Saint-Martin actually became sort of an experiment. So Beaumont would feed him different foods and track his mood, his diet, what things look like. He would take samples in and put stuff in there. So I thought it was kind of a fitting way, given that, well, I'm Canadian, but given that many of you are likely Canadian, that we sort of start off with a little bit of a history to make us proud of some of the areas that we have been involved with and are passionate about. So what is health? Because Beaumont had to deal with a patient that had obviously a surgical wound, but he was otherwise healthy. And so he was able to observe these changes in gastrointestinal conditions as Saint-Martin would eat. But nowadays, health is sort of a moving concept. And the one that I subscribe to, that most scientists, academics, and some doctors do as well, is resilience. So the idea of the body to buffer changes and to have a reserve of that ability to buffer insults. So maintaining homeostasis, as you see on the slide. And an interesting thing about that is we're finding that microbes are actually playing a huge role in that. We've never really been alone, and they've been around since we have been either evolved or come on this earth, whatever creed you subscribe to. A recent article published in the late 2000 teens, I guess, 2010s, was by a group from the Netherlands, and they talked, France and the Netherlands, and they talked about how different ways microbes interact when they're actually swallowed and internalized within us. And this sets the stage nicely for talking about what is and what is not a probiotic, because we really have to back up a little bit, because there are so many misconceptions. You hear everything from, probiotics have no benefits, they're useless, or they work really well, they saved my life, you need huge amounts to work, etc. So you can see on the screen, there's a lot of different misconceptions I've shared. And some of these criticisms are justified, and many are based on confusion, unfortunately. Now, we have a lot of stakeholders who for the most part, are aligned, but not always. And this can create mixed messaging and confusion. And you see a lot of things in the media that are extrapolated responsibly or sometimes irresponsibly. And I want to clear some of that up for you today, or attempt to. If we really go back, probiotics were born from food, and food has been around since the dawn of time. This is a figure that the International Probiotics Association has created, and it's pulling out segments of history that are relevant for the history of probiotics. So we start all the way down, 9,000 BC, when the hunter-gatherers started to become farmers, and they would brew, things with mead or with hops or with a number of different other raw materials. And then you see beer production, you see milk recipes, you see, everything going on. As it becomes more formalized, sort of in the 1900s, you start to get a little bit more of a mature way of understanding the power of microbes. And, Mechnikov talked about microbes in yogurt and how they would increase longevity. You had a number of other different pioneers in the field, Kolath, you had Bruce, you had Lillian Steinwell, and so on. So I'm not going to dwell on this figure. You're welcome to go to the IPA website and download it, but it's there to really set the stage, because sort of in the early 2000s, so 2001 is when the FAO and WHO came up with their definition for probiotics, which I hope you are all familiar with, and that had a more recent update in 2014. But if we look at all microbes, less than 1% of microbes on this planet cause disease. I really want you guys to internalize that, because that's a powerful statement. In it implies that a vast majority are extremely beneficial, and they're all around us. They're in us, they're on us, they're in the soil, in our food, our pets have them, they're in the air. A subset of that is dietary microbes. So those would be the microbes that we ingest from food and beverages and from dietary supplements or food supplements. The last subset, which we're going to focus on, is the probiotic microbes. Now, probiotic microbes are live microorganisms which, when administered in adequate amounts, confer a health benefit on the host. This is the most accepted definition as of Colin Hill's publication with the ISAP 2014, that consensus paper. If you did not know that before now, I'm very happy you're watching this webinar. Not all probiotics are the same. Okay, they have different effects, and they vary from strain to strain. There was a lovely article published in 2018 by Marilyn Sanders and her group that really talked about sort of the clustering of some of these effects and how they demonstrate efficacy downstream for patients and consumers. But I really want to impress on you that one strain is not equal to another, both in their effect and the dose that's required and so on. But I'll get into that later. So I've described to you what is a probiotic. Let's talk about what is not a probiotic. I see a lot of confusion in this area. And I've listed a table here. I've adapted it from an article I wrote with Arthur Auerhand and a few other colleagues last year from a Nutricos publisher. Essentially, the left column says not a probiotic. Then the next column talks about, do they offer benefits? And then the last column is, why are they not a probiotic? So keeping that definition in mind that we just talked about, your native microbiota, it's beneficial for you because you've evolved with it. It helps you to function and survive and stimulate your modulate your immune system, but it's largely undefined. If any of you are walking around with a complete compositional and functional analysis of your microbiome, I salute you. But the majority of us do not know exactly what's there, who's there, and what they're doing. By extension, that cannot be called a probiotic. Fermented foods are a vast source of beneficial microbes. They have a lot of health benefits, but again, it's typically an undefined consortia. We don't know exactly the composition in a SCOBY mother or in the sourdough bread starter or end product of the bread, etc. And some of these fermented foods, the microbes there serve a purely technological or flavor purposes. And so that does not allow them to become a probiotic by definition. So again, I'm going to go through most of these. I won't go through all of them, but I really want you to focus on the criteria for using the term probiotics, because we need to use it responsibly. Fecal microbiota transplant, again, it's not been investigated to understand who's there and what exactly they're doing. We know that people get benefit from it, but it's not a probiotic. Microbes from diet, I hear this all the time. I can get my probiotics from my diet. You can't, unless you're taking a food supplement or a specific probiotic supplement that is from food. A probiotic, again, needs to be that particular microbe at that dose in that consortium or combination of microbes has to be investigated for health and demonstrate, usually typically in a clinical study. You need to understand who's there, what it's doing. It has to have an established safety record and so on. Undocumented candidate novel strains. So a new strain I might have isolated from my dog that's helping his coat to stay super healthy and glossy might be a probiotic for him, but it might not be for me yet until I've done the studies to demonstrate that benefit, and so on. The last one is the dead microbes. So probiotics need to be live by definition. And I hope you can appreciate this chart, and you'll be able to download the slides, as I understand from the organizers afterwards. Utilize it, and please continue to use or start to use the word probiotic, the term, responsibly, and educate your patients and your consumers as well. It's really important that we all speak the same language. So maybe the next question in your mind is, okay, so I now know what a probiotic is and what it's not, but how do I tell if there's good research that backs a probiotic? So I just wanted to spend a quick minute on that. Look for something that's published in a reputable peer-reviewed journal. That's probably the first step. It has to undergo the analysis by peers, the research, whether it's a primary study, a systematic review, a meta-analysis, it doesn't matter. Typically, good studies, high quality probiotic research will entirely describe the product. So what are the strains? Lactobacillus acidophilus 1, 2, 3, and then 5, 8, 9. It'll tell you how much is in there, to tell you the dose, the frequency, was it dissolved in water, how much, did the patients or the subjects take it with yogurt, at what time of day, and so on. That also links into the third point, describing the methods, right? Naturally, you want a study to use good controls. So you should likely have a placebo group. Maybe there's a crossover design, maybe it's matched controls, maybe it's an observational study over time. Each of these study models has innate controls that are responsible to use, and also they limit and give credence to the number of conclusions and the strength of the conclusions you can make from the study. So keep all of that in mind when you're looking and evaluating good probiotic research. And again, I don't remember if I mentioned this in the beginning, please feel free to reach out to me offline if you have any questions, either on the presentation or follow-up things that you think I can help you with. I'd be more than happy to. Word on probiotic labels. A number of the organizations, including IPA and the ISAP, we've put out infographics on good labels. So IPA is there on the left. In the middle, there's also an infographic on the IPA manufacturing guidelines. We've put out a members-only manufacturing guideline, and that outlines everything from concept to finished product. What are the steps that need to happen for a good, high-quality probiotic product to be manufactured? ISAP has put out a nice one where they describe, how to decipher and interpret the probiotic label. So there's lots of good resources out there. This should no longer be an enigma for people, but if it still is, shoot me a message and I'm happy to help you to understand it better. I mentioned manufacturing guidelines, and that sort of leads me quickly to a regulatory point. For those of you who don't know, I hope you all do, or most of you do anyways, probiotics within Canada are regulated under the Natural Health Product Directorate, so the NHPD, and that has a probiotic monograph model. IPA was at the table when this was being developed, so we know it rather intimately, but what I wanted to impress upon you is that probiotic food supplements and dietary supplements are not drugs. You might know that innately, but that also means that there is a level of expectation management that needs to happen, because they do not behave like drugs. There is a difference in the immediacy of effect. The duration of the effect is also different. For some probiotics, you need to take them daily or twice a day, depending on the dose that's in the study to demonstrate the efficacy. They move differently in the body than individual molecules. The target could be absolutely 100% different. It could be systemic, it could be localized. There could be some side effects. They tend to be mild and very transient, if at any, and those are more likely to be bloating, discomfort, and gas, and they tend to go away. If there's pain, you should immediately stop, obviously, because pain is an important signal in the body. But this is unlike drugs. Adverse events with probiotics are rare, and typically they're limited to people who have an underlying disease. I mean, probiotics have been used for a very long time. And if thinking back to the history of probiotics figure, hundreds of years. So they've been used safely in NICUs and ICUs and with no increase of infection over time. So let's not confuse safety, adverse events, serious adverse events with side effects. Again, it's about using the same terms and making sure we're all on the same page. The regulations are different. If it was a probiotic drug or a live biotherapeutic compared to a food supplement, dietary supplement, there are different claims you can make, and there's different substantiation required for those claims. And also shelf life. I hear this a lot. Probiotics don't become toxic when they expire. Their CFU count decreases. That means the number of live microbes decreases in the product. That doesn't mean they're going to kill you. I continue to use probiotics past the expiry date, but I know that the potency is lower, so I tend to take more of them. So these are just a couple of ways that I really want to encourage you to think about and manage your own and your patient or your network's expectations. They don't behave like drugs. So let's not ask them to behave like drugs. So I've set the stage. Now I want to jump in right away to the debate. So I'm going to start off by presenting the side for 3 reasons for against healthy people taking probiotics. In other words, they're not really necessary. So healthy people should not take probiotics because, firstly, there's limited evidence to demonstrate the benefits in healthy people. 2, probiotics do not change the gut microbiota of healthy people. And 3, probiotics stop working after you stop taking them. I've included a couple of bonus reasons. I won't go too much in depth there, but these will typically be the reasons that you will hear when you talk to somebody who is against healthy people taking probiotics. And there have been a number of different levels of substantiation, everything from media articles, probiotics come with bold health claims, but the science is shaky, to articles in JAMA, in Cell. There was a 60-minute segment that went on Lancet. So there's a lot that's going on in reputable, peer-reviewed journals by high-level scientists. Now, these are important to consider because we are all trying to go for the truth. And in terms of the limited evidence, there's a lot of suggestion that probiotics have mostly been studied in disease populations, which is true. They don't change the microbiota, the composition of the gut microbiota, and they tend to stop working. And most of these are fairly accurate statements. And those are the top 3 reasons for not taking probiotics when you're healthy. And now I'm going to present the 3 reasons for taking probiotics when you're healthy. And then we'll do a rebuttal and I'll switch again. I hope this doesn't get too confusing. So the top 3 reasons in favor of healthy people taking probiotics are that probiotics maintain health and reduce disease risk for healthy individuals. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, Jesse, that's kind of in direct contrast with what you just said. Well, again, I'm trying to sort of split my brain here. And if I was arguing one side or the other, these are the points I would make. And so there are definitely articles that demonstrate a maintenance of health and reduction of disease risk. And I'll get into those in a second. Probiotics actually support resilience. Remember, we talked about health, that buffering capacity, that homeostasis. And they support resilience not only through interaction with microbes that are in us and on us, but also our own human cells. I'll come to that again. And probiotics can be a big part of a healthy start for infants and children. And I've included 2 bonus reasons there, but I won't get into those very much. So I talked about how they maintain health and reduce disease risk. There's a really nice article that came out a few years ago by Simon Kalesi, and it talks literally about this, a review of probiotic supplementation in healthy adults, helpful or hype. I strongly recommend you all read it. I don't have time to go through everything in it in this presentation, but it's a very good starting point to also gather more additional argumentation depending on which way you want to go. I'm giving very top level information here, but it is evidence-based. So they go through that, but there have also been a number of different reviews that are published. And let's not forget, for probiotics to be food supplements, dietary supplements in Canada and the US and other areas around the world, they cannot prevent, cure, or treat disease because they will become drugs. Now, yes, you will see an article that comes out or a peer-reviewed research paper that comes out, probiotics can offer benefits in chronic kidney disease or reduce the risk of osteoporosis or things like that. So there are specific gray areas where probiotics are studied, but you do not see those making claims. Ergo, we cannot use them as products on the market for those reasons unless they have the appropriate substantiation for that regulatory level. But when it comes to maintaining health and disease risk, you have things like lactose intolerance. This is a poster child use for probiotic efficacy. You have all sorts of gastrointestinal complaints, from bloating to diarrhea, constipation, discomfort, and that could be in elderly, in pregnant women, in children. You have colic, you have antibiotic-associated diarrhea. So there are loads of areas, and that's only dealing with the gut. If you sort of take that beyond, you have upper respiratory tract infections, you have modulating the immune system, so there are a number of different ways that probiotics can actually help support healthy people and reduce disease risk. And my favorite of all is actually digestion. If you think about it, anything that goes through your gut is going to interact with your microbes in your gut. And so digestion of protein, breakdown of short chain fatty acids, absorption of vitamins and minerals, bioavailability of other compounds, bioremediation, so chelation and conjugation of different potentially toxic compounds. These are all really important functions of your microbes and in your gut, and probiotics can be a part of that. And there are ones that have specifically demonstrable effects, even with iron metabolism and absorption for menstruating women or those who are undergoing infections, because we know that, for instance, if you have a particular pathogen, lactobacilli, for instance, they like to sequester the iron so that other pathogens don't use it. And that sort of leads me to the second point, where there is a constant interaction of probiotics with other microbes, whether they're pathogenic or beneficial, but also with your human cells. I could give you a laundry list of the cells that we have evidence for that probiotics affect in a positive way. Mast cells, neutrophils, macrophages, glial cells, your Paneth cells, you name it, there's probably been a study that demonstrates there is some positive effect. And that's not even getting into the molecules themselves. And there's microbes are chatty. There's a lot of quorum sensing and quenching. It's like these little microbes are sending out all sorts of email communications and, do this, do that. I'm over here. Hi, guys, I woke up, or I'm dead. Come take my resources type of thing. So that's number 2. And number 3, the part of a healthy microbial start for infants. I think this is a really important one because it has to do a lot with not only prevention, but also maintenance of health. And we know sort of a loss and gain of function idea. We know that, for example, infants that are born prematurely that often end up, unfortunately, in the ICU or the NICU, they may or may not develop NEC, so necrotizing enterocolitis. And this really has been identified as an improper assembly of the gut microbiota in these infants. In other words, they get an infection and subsequent symptoms, which can result in death, because they are missing specific microbes. And we have evidence to demonstrate that the NNT for all-cause mortality for probiotics with NEC is remarkably good. Depending on whose research you're citing, I think it's in the low 30s. And that, in other words, so you give 30 patients, you could prevent 1 death. And I mean, that's incredible with no side effects. So when we talk about tailoring, and I love the title of this opinion paper, Tailor to the Infant, a Window of Opportunity. The other thing about microbes is that they really help us to train our immune system. So the more kids are exposed to a variety of microbes, beneficial, neutral, holobionts, opportunistic pathogens, hopefully not real pathogens, but the more their body adapts and is able to really understand how to deal with these microbes. And that's why it's so important for kids to play outside and to be with other kids and to eat dirt and to eat a variety of foods, right? So that is really an important part. And if your kids, I mean, nowadays we're not as adventurous as we were, pre-COVID, probiotics can be a healthy start, a microbial start for infants and children because they're vetted at the door. We know who they are. We know that they're good. And they're very targeted and specific. The last thing I wanted to go over before I jump to the rebuttal, because I think this is an important piece of literature for this audience to be aware of, is a recent study that was published, and it looks at the number of studies, clinical studies that have been registered with probiotics. And the authors looked at clinicaltrials.gov or the ICTRP database, apologies for that, which is registered with the WHO. And they identified over 1,600 studies, clinical trials with probiotics that looked at over 700 different conditions. It's a fascinating read. if you're ever interested. It's a reasonably good and well-written article. IPA actually sponsored the authors to do this because we thought it was important to actually have a catalog of what has been done in terms of the numerical quantity and the outcomes. But in case you don't have time for that, here's a much shorter article. And this is one that's been published in a more trade-like industry journal. And it's called Probiotics, Microbes Optimizing for Health. And in there, we give a sort of generic generalization based on meta-analyses of the benefits of probiotics. So you see everything from reducing risk for antibiotic-associated diarrhea and neck and respiratory tract infections to A to P, allergic rhinitis, dental caries, weight management, and so on and so on. So I'm happy to send this around. You'll get a copy of these slides so you can look up these publications. But these are a really nice, both of the two articles I just mentioned are a really nice summary of some of the health benefits that you can see. And again, at a cursory glance, some of these are in very healthy people with no existing comorbidities. Others are in patients who actually have an existing comorbidity. So I wanted to get into the rebuttal, and I apologize that I'm zooming through this so fast, but there's a short window of time and I want to make sure you can get as much information crammed into the session as possible. So this rebuttal will be by the side that's against taking probiotics for healthy people, talking to the points of the Foresight. So when the Foresight said, probiotics maintain health and reduce disease risk, if you look at the literature and do a quick search in PubMed, you'll have over 30,000 references for the word probiotic. And you'll have over 3,000 probiotic clinical studies listed in PubMed as of right now. And you might be saying, okay, Jess, but you just said that there was a study that said 1,600. Right, what's the difference? The screening protocol that happened in this study, they were very stringent in how they selected those articles. And this search that I just did also includes animals. So yes, that point is true. There are studies that exist for maintaining health and reducing disease risk. So that's a point that is more difficult to make a rebuttal for. When you talk about supporting resilience, remember that buffering capacity, that homeostasis, this is kind of difficult to study in an RCT. Now, that's not the fault of the RCT, because the RCT is designed to study a very specific thing within very specific boundaries in that box, and it's good at extrapolating from that box. But when we talk about resilience, this is really more on the level of personalized nutrition, personalized probiotics. So the question that the rebuttal side would say is, okay, diversity might not be a target that's appropriate of the gut. So if we're not able to change diversity, then what should we actually be studying? And how can you actually design a study to prove that? So these are just things to think about. If I was the for side responding to the rebuttal by the against side, I would probably say something like, you have to look at the totality of evidence. But again, this is a fair point because it is difficult to study and support these trials with RCTs, which tend to be the gold standard in the healthcare professional world. When you talk about the third point that the Foresight raised, probiotics can be part of a healthy microbial start for infants, it's rather difficult to make a rebuttal to this point because the evidence is fairly concrete. There should be, though, the comment made that certain probiotic strains are unsuitable for young infants and for children under, I believe it's the age of 2, specifically circling around D-lactate. If you have a question on that, feel free to reach out offline. So only really the second point is able to be rebutted, and a little bit of the first point. But again, I'm trying to represent facts on both sides and give you evidence and talking points so you can make your own decision. And then just for the purpose of being thorough, the 2 bonus reasons that the Foresight had mentioned, probiotics meet rigorous regulatory and safety standards, and they're science-based. The against side would say, well, actually, there are no harmonized regulations around the world, and by extension, limited standards, so this becomes very confusing to a consumer. Now, we are speaking from the Canadian perspective, which is a very good model. It's very clear cut. You can make claims based on your probiotic monograph. And so that doesn't per se apply, but if you're looking at regulations around the world, there is no standard, and that's a challenge. When you talk about science-based and evidence-based, yes, there is science, but the amount of evidence and the type of evidence is very heterogeneous, and not all randomized control trials are positive. So that's something that needs to be considered. But really, what the for side would say to the rebuttal of the against side, I hope this is not too confusing, would be that you really have to look on a case-by-case basis. So let's jump to the other side now. So now the for side will be rebuttaling against the side that's against healthy people taking probiotics. And they say, okay, their first point was there's no evidence to demonstrate benefits in healthy people. Well, a quick PubMed search will generate, again, 30,000 references for probiotic and over 3,000 probiotic clinical studies mentioned in PubMed. A further screened list will demonstrate over 1,600 clinical trials registered at clinicaltrials.gov and over 700 disease conditions and situations that have been used. So there are a lot of data out there to support the use in healthy people. The second point that the against side mentioned was that probiotics don't change the gut microbiota of healthy people, so they can't work. Oh, apologies for the typo on the slide. Well, the thing is, the rebuttal for that point would be probiotics have functional effects on the microbiota, not all the time compositional. What do I mean by that? So we have a group of 20 people in a room. A compositional analysis of that group of 20 people would say, okay, there's 20 people, 10 of them are women, 10 of them are men. Of those 20 people, 4 have blonde hair, 16 have dark hair. Some of them are eating, some of them are sitting down. So we see who they are and what they look like. The functional analysis of that would be, well, some of the guys are sitting down, some of the women are there, some are talking, some are eating, some are doing a variety of different things. One of them is sleeping, one of them is trying to open the door. So what are they actually doing? So compositional deals with who they are, what they look like. Functional deals with what they're actually doing. And when you're talking about the effects of a probiotic, most of the science is moving towards the functional aspect of it. So can we change what the microbes are doing? Not per se changing who they are and who's in that room. Keep that in mind. So they have to have functional effects, not just compositional effects. And so we might not be looking for a change in the composition of the gut microbiota in healthy people. We might not even be able to detect that. And the other thing is, as I mentioned before, is that probiotics actually affect not only our microbes, but also our human cells, immune system cells, endocrine cells, muscle cells, bone, gut cells, and so on. So just basing it on the target or the endpoint of the microbiota is not per se fair. It just takes into account one aspect of it. Then the last point that they made for their top 3 was probiotics stop working after you stop taking them. Well, the effects of a probiotic are transient in nature by design. It's actually sort of a built-in safety mechanism. Most drugs have a stop mechanism or an antidote or a way you can remove that drug from the system. And in a way, you can make the analogy to probiotics. They don't really need to colonize to have health benefits. They tend to go there, they'll transiently colonize for maybe a couple of weeks, a day, depending on the probiotic, and then they'll leave. So they do not need to colonize to promote efficacy, and we see that in studies all the time. The 3 bonus reasons that were mentioned by the against side are probiotics are too expensive, they're unregulated, and probiotics are unsafe. Okay, so probiotics are too expensive. Well, depending on how you're talking about this, the average cost in the US for a probiotic product is about $25 a month. That's $1 a day. If patients are unable to afford that, then they're too expensive for them, for sure. But if we take that on a bigger level, there were 3 modeling studies that were done in Canada, the States, and in France. And they showed that for the prophylactic use of probiotics in AAD, or antibiotic-associated diarrhea, billions of dollars in healthcare money were saved by just using probiotics. I'm happy to provide these references if people want to dig into this further, but the argument that probiotics are too expensive, I don't think is a fair one, or at least the for side does not think it's a fair one because of some of the evidence that exists. Probiotics are unregulated. This is a very gross misconception, and it's actually an unfair one to the regulating agencies around the world who spend a lot of time and money regulating probiotics. They are most definitely regulated by Health Canada's NHPD. Each product, again, falls under the probiotic monograph model, and they have strict quality and safety criteria. Probiotics are unsafe, so that would be the last sort of bonus point for healthy people. Well, again, I've mentioned this a couple times already. There have been a number of studies just taking Cochrane's database, 90 studies, meta-analyses that have been done regarding probiotic safety and efficacy, and not all of them are neutral or negative. There are some positive ones. And again, probiotics have been consumed all over the world in increasing quantities without increasing levels of infection. So I've presented now the for side, the against side, and the rebuttal for both sides. I wanted to leave you some final comments and some take-home thoughts as my last 2 slides. So health again is really about enhancing the resilience to buffer those changes. And probiotics have a lot of evidence to demonstrate the ability to affect health and resilience on both the macro and micro level in healthy people, but also in disease models. But again, going back to the regulations, we can't make those claims. So we tend to think more about probiotics in healthy people. Beneficial microbes have evolved to work in synergy with humans throughout our history together. And so using probiotics, yes, definitely using functional foods and fresh foods. Apples have, 100 million microbes in them. So definitely be taking your fresh foods when you can, and a diversity of them to get beneficial microbes. But again, they're not probiotics. So include a probiotic supplement if you have a specific condition, or just a general supplement to promote diversity. And talk with multiple sources of people or information who have a big picture of probiotic science. Don't just stick with 1 or 2. Talk with a variety. So that could be academics, that could be industry scientists like myself, could be your fellow healthcare professionals. It could be, you can Google a lot nowadays, but it's really hard to understand what's good and what's not. So talk with people and get a better picture of where things are in the space. This is a really friendly and a very open field of science, and a lot of people in it are very passionate about what they do. So I'm sure they would be more than happy to answer your questions. And then just linking back to our objectives for today, really communicate about probiotics with accuracy and scientific understanding to the best of your ability. Don't refer to all potential sources of dietary microbes as probiotics, because they're not, according to the definition. Don't conflate the health benefits of probiotics with strict benefits on the gut microbiome or microbiota. In other words, you're not per se just looking for a functional or a compositional change in the gut microbe community. Don't generalize probiotics from one study. There's a specific strain or a combination of strains, a specific dose given in a specific time. That's what makes a probiotic a probiotic. So there can be extrapolation that happens, but this has to be done responsibly, taking into account the totality of evidence. But it's rather dangerous to say that based on one study, probiotics can do that. No, based on that one study, this particular strain can do that in this context. So let's be responsible about the terms in our communication. And really, whenever possible, focus on efficacy demonstrated in a clinical trial. Be specific, be deliberate. Which strains for what purpose? There's a great resource from the Probiotics Clinical Guide. I hope you guys are all aware of it. That's a great start for people. It does not focus on healthy people. There are a couple of indications in there that do, but it's a great resource to be very specific and to understand what brands can be linked to what benefits. So use that. Again, talk to the variety of people, understand how they look at it, talk to your peers, what are they using? Talk to your patients, they're probably extremely informed. And if you're not a healthcare professional looking at this, reach out to myself, reach out to healthcare professionals who are informed or academics. I'm sure we'd all be happy to help you. My last point again is my personal opinion is that probiotics are beneficial for healthy people in a variety of contexts. They can support digestion, they can modulate your immune system, they can give you a healthy start, they can help you to remind your body what is a good microbe and what is not, and how to deal with things. So I would strongly recommend, as a personal opinion, not a healthcare professional, that healthy people should take probiotics if they're able to. But again, I've presented both sides, and I'll leave you to make your own conclusions for yourself and your patients and your network. Thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate your time. And feel free to reach out to me offline if you have any questions or you want some clarification. Thank you so much.